it is my pleasure, therefore, to introduce my chairman again, who is going to serve as moderator for this panel that's going to look at technology, specifically AI and blockchain. And we have some very interesting panelists that he is going to be able to engage in the conversation on governance of small states and the impact of technology for us. So Nigel, I am going to hand over the virtual panel to you now.
Thank you very much, Kamala. I think we've had some really interesting, some very thought-provoking conversations so far. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Professor Eelco Fiole, co-founder and managing partner of Alpha Governance Partners, a fiduciary services partnership with partners serving as risk governance specialists in complex investments, blockchain, sustainability, and fintech across Europe, North America, and Asia. He's also honorary and adjunct professor of finance ethics at the universities of Neuchâtel and Lausanne, respectively. And like me, he has a long history in the finance industry. You can read a lot of that in his bio. He is based in Zurich. He holds a PhD in economics from Basel and degrees in social innovation from Cambridge, environmental governance from Geneva, blockchain technology from Barcelona, applied ethics in Zurich, positive leadership Madrid, laws London, business and engineering, both Rotterdam, which I think he's originally from. He has authored a book on corporate governance in financial institutions and various professional publications. Professor Fiole, over to you.
Thank you very much. That's a lot. As I said in the intro, in Starbucks I go by Peter, much easier. So Eelco will do just fine. Yes, so my background is in finance, and I say this as a bit of an introduction so that you understand where I'm coming from, especially in the alternative investments and wealth management space. And over the years, I've seen how governance actually was lacking, let's say, and I started to become more and more interested. And so I specialized increasingly in that field. Now, the two major topics in finance today are sustainability, and you've talked about that already, and the new exponential technologies. And as you've said, Nigel, I've been lecturing on finance ethics since around 15 years, kind of a niche subject, but I hope to teach my Master in Finance students better decision making. As Professor Garrett mentioned in the intermezzo just now, new directors will have to have different skill sets. In fact, current directors, I would argue, already need to have different skill sets, even though they may not recognize that. And that is also true for finance professionals who make investment decisions with other people's money. And I say this because this is an important concept in finance. Now, to kick off on the ethical issues of and governance implications, if you will, of these two exponential technologies, and we have more. We have also metaverse, we have AR, VR, we have all kinds of other things going on. But if I speak first about artificial intelligence, in a nutshell, and I'm certain that Louis will be able to give me a lot more detail on this, I would call them prediction engines. Right? You have models that we put together and you apply these models to data sets and predictions come out. I mean, that may be the simplest version. I'm certainly not doing justice here to all the people and all the effort that goes into it. Now, the people are, I think, rightfully scared for what AI may do. And recently, or literally this week, I was speaking to my son who was considering what to study, and he said, Dad, what should I study so that AI will not take over? And you can imagine that is not an easy conversation. You need to be on top of things. So it's right to be mindful and respectful of what AI can do. Now, on a spectrum, you can perceive low risk and high risk with AI. And I like to speak about high risk. And high risk comes in when AI would take on, let's call it moral agency, i.e. make decisions which impact people. Now, there's a lot in that 3, 4, 5 words. First of all, AI not automatically makes decisions, right? It may prepare for decisions that humans can take. However, you can quickly imagine an AI that develops an AI and creates the decision. So this could spiral, of course, out of control. The second element in that sentence was about impacting people. And so the ethical issue in AI is clearly to understand which stakeholders are affected. Now, this is a governance question per se, right? And so this is also going to be valid for blockchain. I'm going to speak about in a moment. And therefore, we will need to understand as we develop applications and models in AI, who are my stakeholders in this? Said otherwise, who has an interest at stake? And I think that's a key question to ask, who has an interest at stake, and then understand what is that interest, how is that stake being represented in the design of models, and how can I address concerns of those stakeholders. And that's also true for blockchain. I'll speak about it in a second in terms of protocol design. Now, that means that we need to think about scenarios, right? And how scenarios of an AI application can unfold, and what risks are, could take place that will affect stakeholders. And so there is a big piece of analysis needed, and let me call this ethical analysis, around stakeholders, around scenarios. And I would argue this is a dynamic process. So as we move forward with these applications into the future, we also need to have a future point in time in which we need to reassess, do we do justice to all the stakeholders, and what does justice actually require? And there's a whole catalog in there, what justice would require. I'm not talking about legal justice. I'm talking about moral justice in a kind of a Rawlsian, if you will, way. Not just only rules, of course, but legal justice is something, and we'll certainly speak about regulation, which is sort of following the developments. Now, I would challenge any developer in AI, but also in blockchain, if there is awareness around these justice requirements. So let me leave it at that for AI for the moment. I think that's the where moral agency comes in, and we can easily think about those, right? The drones that can search for targets and with collateral damage and so on. Maybe even medical robots that operate but don't do the right thing, etc. You can quickly think about and come up with examples where this comes in. Blockchain is a quite different technology, also exponential. And in one sentence, I would say blockchain is the technology that enables a trusted transfer of value. And so you can send money, risks, information, and so on from A to B, and based on a technology which you can trust with encryption and so on and so forth. Now, this technology is being developed since a number of years already. It's like AI, by the way. It is not that new, although this is a combination of technologies. And a lot of people speak about centralized technology versus decentralized blockchain applications. We can speak about that as well. But what is key to this transfer of value is that if you think about, for example, investment business or banking, wherever we transfer value there, we're going to be regulated because we are transferring other people's value. If we transfer other people's money, other people's interests, there is what we call a fiduciary duty. Now, common law systems know this in law. Fiduciary duty of directors of companies, fiduciary duties of investment managers using other people's money. But in this case, you operate maybe a blockchain protocol where you transfer information from A to B, be it value or something else. And there's a fiduciary duty, a heightened duty of loyalty versus the owner of that value. And so here you go into a similar analysis in the sense that you have to look at stakeholders. And those stakeholders can be on-chain, i.e. participant, but sometimes they can also be off-chain. Regulators, for example, are clearly stakeholders. They look at things like market integrity, investor protection, policies, and so on. How are they going to be represented? And so the representation of those stakeholders in these blockchain protocols also needs to be designed. This is clearly, this is oftentimes forgotten. You will have tech developers that develop something interesting, of course, and useful, and maybe also very good. But how stakeholders are being defined, who has an interest at stake, etc., and how is it being represented? That is not something that automatically comes to mind. Now, if we speak about a decentralized blockchain infrastructure, as you hear a lot, Web3, DeFi, decentralized finance, and so on, this governance becomes decentralized as well. And how do you keep check that the protocol is doing what it's supposed to do and the ecosystem is served? So that means that we need to have those stakes represented. We need to design influence, what rights and duties are associated with tokens, for example, that you use on a protocol. How do incentive systems work? How can we avoid collusion and these kind of things? Now, you will have heard of the term smart contract. A smart contract, if I make that very, very short, is an if-then-else sentence. So if this happens, then that's going to be the conclusion. Else, we do something else. If, then, else. Very well-known sequence in computer science. And so that's typically a smart contract. If a condition appears, execute instruction X, Y, Z, and otherwise do something else. So this is, and this is a rule based in code. And so a smart contract will, at the point of execution, will start transferring something, doing some things. If you put sets of smart contracts together, you get a whole machine of contracts with a whole causality, let's say, and this is being applied in things like decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, if you may have heard of, and other structures. Now, you can imagine very easily that if something gets transferred but you don't agree, that you cannot rely on just a piece of code that was put together by a developer somewhere. And so you will need to think about an interface into a legal system, right? Because if the interest at stake is high enough, we will not be able to talk this over anymore. We will ask a court to pass a ruling and say, who owns the value in a certain block or in a certain phase of, a certain location in a blockchain. And so, as I said, the governance of this protocol or protocols is extremely important. As I say, designing of stakes, representation of stakes, token engineering, which rights and duties are associated with them. So two very different technologies, but growing at the speed of light, for which we need to be respectful. This is tricky in the light of all the business opportunities, of course, that we see in both technologies. And we've seen that also in the last couple of years in terms of, on the one hand, out of control, out of whack valuations of protocols and companies and tokens and so on in both fields, AI as well as blockchain. And at the same time, the scandals that we also have seen, especially the big ones we already have seen in blockchain, in crypto. Clearly, crypto is being one example of a blockchain application with FTX, very prominent, but also other ones. But also in AI, we recently had the big fuss with OpenAI, the main, not main inventor, but one big one, let's say, and that was a governance issue as well. So oftentimes you realize that those governance regimes are not very well thought through in exponential technologies. Now, to come back to make it full circle, if you then apply those both of those technologies to high value environments such as finance, but finance is not the only one, of course. Privacy data, you can think about other things as well, private data, then it is easy to understand that it is actually very important to get this one right. Nigel, is that a fair introduction?
That's an excellent introduction. Thank you very much. We have a lot to put our heads around. So let me introduce our panelist, Louis, and he pronounces it Louis. My middle name is also Louis, but I pronounce it Louis. So Louis is the co-founder and CEO of LinkMe, a technology company born and built in Trinidad and Tobago. He was my neighbor for a few years, which assists financial services clients across the Americas, moving from paper-based manual processes to digital-first service delivery. He's a lifelong learner and mentor, originally from Seattle, USA, who spent 5 years, including the COVID lockdowns, living in Sweet PNC. And then we have Edwin. Edwin Ward is founder member of Malta Association of Directors. He's a director of WX2, an enterprise with diverse holdings in media, commercial property, and hospitality, as well as investments in the emerging innovation economy. Under Edwin's leadership, WX2 Advertising and PR collaborates with clients across 11 countries, excelling in brand development, rebranding, and reputation management. As a senior strategic advisor to the European Parliament Information Office, he was instrumental in achieving the highest voter turnout in Europe during the 2014 European elections with 74.8%. I think we need your expertise in some of our countries, Edwin. Louis, over to you. How do you respond to Eelco or Eelco?
Well,
Teacher.
first, yeah, right. Thank you. And I see we have that in common. I tell people in Starbucks, my name is Tyler. Much easier. And so, first off, I just want to thank the CCGI and Professor Garrett and Kamala and Nigel for bringing us all together. It's truly an honor to share the stage with you, Dr. Fiole, and everyone else that's shared as well. Really great learnings and just an honor to be part of the conversation. So, my background has been more in data privacy and data ownership. And, I wanted to actually start, though, with just reimagining governance in a construct that is transparent, efficient, and really hard to corrupt. And I think we can all agree that the transparency is always going to be an issue at some level because you have to balance that with privacy. But many of the issues that we face, going all the way back to the days when Professor Garrett mentioned projecting power during the maritime days, it was about finding a shared incentive, something that was worth putting our time and effort into, or our capital, and then being able to check on that capital. right? And we do this with governments, right? We're agreeing to contribute some of our efforts and pay taxes and support the community that we live in. And some of us, some folks have the opportunity to choose where they contribute their efforts, and others don't. And in your definition, those are all stakeholders, right? In all cases, the decisions that we're making as corporations, as governments, are impacting a lot of people who don't have a say in what those decisions truly are. And excellent work, Edwin, because 74% turnout is incredible. And it seems though that even if we had 74% voter turnout everywhere, it would be hard to truly verify today with the systems and ways of thinking that we have, whether that 74% really decided the outcome of a decision. And going to the chaos that we've seen in the last several years, debating elections and the validity of things, when we think of blockchain, the underlying technology, whether it's applied to a financial system or not, provides a lot of the solutions to those problems. And there are a lot of different expressions of this that we see around the world. The scarier ones are the centralized government-controlled digital dollars that would, more than likely lead to maximum surveillance and control. And then there's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is completely open source, community-driven, and built and maintained by trusting and untrusting parties that have no formal legal agreements, much like a lot of the small states that we hail from or have been a part of, right? As people in the world, we are going through and hoping that the laws and rules that we've written on paper are enforced justly and that they lead to the best outcomes for all of us. And so I really wanted to just spend a couple minutes to explore the concepts of, collaboration and organization in a blockchain sphere. And we'll touch on the AI side a little bit, but I think we've all heard a lot about that in the last year or two. So, when we think about organizing and collaborating, it's how are we proving that when we've done something of value, we're compensated, and whatever that is. And if we think of any job that's being done, whether it's that of the board of directors or the person coming to fix your sink, at the end of the day, they have to produce a report or some outcome that proves they did work, that proves the organization did work. And in the blockchain construct, right, this is token generation or mining Bitcoins, right? There are a lot of different ways to call it, but we're proving that we've done work and we're generating value for that. Now, the biggest innovation of the blockchain, I hope we could agree, is really the distributed proof of ownership of something in a way that we can all see a copy and we can all agree on the state of truth in the world. And when we think about sending value, right, it's being able to put that on a public ledger that we can all see at this moment in time, I have control of this value. So when we think of that in terms of, governing, that could be used as a way to vote in a given decision. And in the Ethereum and more smart contract space, to build on that idea, we've seen the growth of what's called a decentralized autonomous organization. And when we think about governance, a lot of the challenges are looking at whether the code of conduct and the bylaws that we've written for the organization have been followed, and reporting on what's gone on throughout the year in alignment with or drifting from those bylaws. But there's no way to truly verify that other than pouring through reams of financial statements and production reports and other things, because today a lot of that data and that information is distributed all over the place. But with a distributed organization, a distributed autonomous organization, where each of us maybe had a share in that organization or a vote or a digital identity that we could use to stand up and say, hey, at this moment, this is the value or the stake that I have in this operation or this organization. And on this given matter, here's my opinion. And whether that's you announcing that you've completed some work or you voting in a shareholder's decision, that vote or your signature on that transaction can be recorded in a public and very verifiable way. Now, getting into the standards a little bit, without getting too technical, there are great standards that have established the rules and protocols for how we use a blockchain and mathematical encryption and cryptography to, sign and prove that we own something without actually revealing who we are. So while that might be a totally public and verifiable vote, who controlled that vote and who controlled that signature can still be obfuscated and obscured from the general public knowledge. So by combining decentralized autonomous organizations where you can codify your bylaws and codify your rules of conduct, distribute tokens on a ledger, to prove ownership, you can also now use that ownership to vote in a way that's verifiable but still private, and have all of that on one shared ledger that's quickly reportable and auditable at the end of the year. And I think we can all agree that if we had a general ledger of the whole business's activities for the year and all the votes and decisions that were made at meetings along the way, and if we had that in a format that we could simply ask at the end of the year, what were the activities? What were the things that went on? And have an auditable trail of that that's absolutely verifiable with math, that the reporting and governance of an organization would become much simpler and much more transparent, to the effect that we might not have to have so much fighting and disagreement to, come to a conclusion on what the truth of a given, state of affairs is. And I'd just like to leave us with that idea that much in the same way as a joint stock corporation kind of kicked off the modern model of corporate, shared liability, decentralized autonomous organizations are really starting to kick off the next wave of ownership and collaboration in a verifiable way. And I think as we go through the coming decades, we're going to see really an evolution of how we use blockchain to record and drive our decisions. And AI will definitely factor in. But I think, as Professor Fiole noted, the more control we have over the decision making is probably the better. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Louis. Edwin, what's your perspective before we get into the conversation?
Well, very nice to be on the panel with such distinguished company. I was struck throughout the day how much intellectual firepower you've managed to gather together today for the event, and I'm sure your members in CCGI would be very appreciative of just the quality of interventions, the depth of the thinking. It's been a lovely day of conversation and learning. So thank you for the invitation to be part of it. I thought I'd kick off actually with an anecdote. when I was asked to be chair of our National Institute of Directors, I thought the first thing that I should do is an event on AI and blockchain.
Mhm.
And since I'd been involved with different parts of the European political system, and basically from 2015 based entirely in Brussels from January of 2015. I'd made quite a nice network of contacts there. And I was involved in a variety of things. But, I thought we really, as a country, needed to test our market readiness to become the blockchain island. Our government was talking about being the world's first blockchain island, and that we would use that as the sort of slingshot to achieve our next phase of growth as an economy. So anyway, I invited Professor Robbie Houben, who is the rapporteur to the Tax 3 Committee in the European Parliament. And he's like, the guy who reports on crypto and blockchain as far as tax is concerned. And it's a very important committee, Tax 3. So there was a lot of activity in terms of the island attracting new companies and people who had an interest in this new economic model, which was just being put together. And I brought a guy from the States who had a really interesting crypto concept to turn air miles or gold or any other element of value into crypto and out of crypto again. So one of the sort of pioneers there. And also the CEO of our Digital Innovation Authority, which is the regulator for the area. And I also invited the financial services regulator. Anyway, we had a very high-powered event, conference, discussion, webinars, seminars, a lot of due diligence around the legislation and how we had come to frame our positioning as a country within the EU. And actually at the event, Robbie Houben said that Malta's doing more, this was in 2017, doing more than AMLD 5 will require when it comes into force in 2020. And, gave us a clean bill of health. I think everyone felt that we were on the right path, that we were moving towards probably the greatest leap that the country could ever take in terms of adopting a new economic model. Anyway, someone called me, someone very, very senior from a regulatory authority, and said, listen, I think you're going to get a call because there's been an incident, and basically some investigative journalists discovered that about 60 billion in cryptocurrency and various other virtual assets had moved through Malta immediately after we had made this blockchain island announcement. And, you know, having been given a clean bill of health on the legislation and on the regulatory oversight, this seemed to be a shock to everyone who was involved in trying to nurture this new economy. And I say all of this because, you know, it was right at the beginning, the first year of Malta's blockchain dream. And it had literally in weeks, maybe just a few weeks, 10, 12, 14 weeks, it turned into the Wild West. An explosion of high-risk transactions, an unlicensed environment. You know, I think someone very reputable had conducted an international survey that put Malta at the top of the cryptocurrency trade volumes during this period globally. So, you know, all the alarm bells started ringing in the European Commission and elsewhere. And it was a shock, you know, it was a shock to the system. So when we're talking about corporate governance and companies who are attracted to a country through FDI incentives, and probably our friends in the Caribbean are using incentives to attract companies, or our friends all over the world are probably using a variety of incentives. It's very easy for it all to go wrong. So the governance within the companies is definitely an issue. And having frameworks and having legislation and having strong supervisory and technical people, all of that being necessary, it may still not work. And it attracted my attention that the latest AI governance report surveyed about 700 leaders to find out how ready they are to control the use of AI in their organizations, and how to ensure that these new tools and technologies are broadly beneficial. Not just beneficial to the companies, but beneficial to the stakeholders. And it was, I think, an eye-opener for me. 58% of organizations have no AI expertise on their boards, or don't know what proficiency they may have. So that's pretty worrying. Without knowledge of how to get the best out of AI while controlling the potential negative impacts, whether they're private to their business ecosystem, or public, or even third sector organizations. So, you know, there's a question mark there around AI. I think in addition, they'll be more likely to make mistakes by not spotting potential problems with AI use. That's an outcome from the survey. Another interesting element to this: 90% of these organizations had no structures and processes in place to control the use of AI internally and in their supply chains. The more informed board members would be in the 10%. So there's a lot of ground to cover for all of us who are directors or CEOs or chairs, or in different aspects of our directorial lives. Do we want to belong to the 90%, or do we want to belong to the 10%? I think the other area where I thought it might be interesting for our discussion, 18%, even when a board had some AI knowledge, only 18% had the structure to control AI use. So, these gaps, and we were, I think, listening to different people, especially Caroline, who was driving this idea of metrics, having some metrics around new technologies, blockchain, AI, some other emerging technologies, that could be helpful. And I think, as we sort of run through our discussion today, I see this as a pretty good starting point.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Some very different perspectives, and I wanted to go back to the Eelco's point that the high risk use of AI and, in fact, blockchain, where you have that moral agency, where the machine is making decisions that affect people's lives, both directly, and you gave the example that suppose you have self-driving cars and machines doing operations and that kind of stuff. But you also have, in the case of blockchain, with the smart contract, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that what we're talking about is narrow artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence that is based on the programming of the person setting up the AI. And that it is important that as people charged with governance, those with the fiduciary duties, have to understand what is happening here. How was this thing programmed? What are the biases that it could be subject to? How do you audit and control? So I would like to get into that, because what you get, and the other thing that the boards of these organizations are the ones ultimately responsible, not the AI, because AI is not a responsible entity. AI is following instruction. So I'll start with you, Eelco.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. So if I first start with corporate governance and what you just mentioned, the directors, the companies are responsible. I agree with you that many board directors are not equipped at this stage to judge what they're looking at. And that is not just, by the way, on these exponential technologies. I think also in the field of sustainability, purpose, things that you have discussed before. I mean, the reality is that at the moment, and I'm not going to go in there, but the world is very complex, right? With way too much money printing, with geopolitical tension and so on. So the demands on the boards are absolutely huge. If I speak, and I serve on boards as well, of course. If I speak with people on boards, oftentimes I get feedback like, "Oh, it's another IT thing, and we've done IT before, so this is going to be something else," or the next IT thing. Actually, it is something else. And so the recognition that we have some paradigm changing trends going on and increasing the awareness around that is not there yet and is badly needed. And I tend to agree with Louis that he said, we need to, how do you provide assurance that the thing does what it says it does? And so we see new assurance also firms coming up, not just the regular, the big four, the accountants, but also within the blockchain world, we see assurance companies coming up. But I mentioned the ambition level for business. I think that we also need to be humble and say, you know what, certain things we don't go there, we don't do. We have an option, and the option is also that we don't exercise it. And so that we stay away from certain things, especially when there is, when the risk, the ethical risk becomes too high. Because we don't have the tools yet to and the thinking yet to limit those or mitigate those risks. So now, in terms of small states, I'm based in Switzerland, and as you may know, we have a very vibrant blockchain community already for quite a number of years. In fact, what Switzerland as a small country did is they put a legal framework in place around tokens, and as a result, early on, attracted a lot of entrepreneurship to the country. But in the meantime, the regulator has become more careful, given that tokens have different functions, and so it is a bit more difficult now than maybe it was 5 years ago. And I think as a small country, Switzerland was aware that they don't have all the functions to serve as an ecosystem. So, for example, blockchain developers, or for that matter, AI developers, there's some around, but typically they're not in Switzerland. So service providers around it, be it assurance, legal, corporate structures, and so on, is something that Switzerland does. There's, of course, also huge experience with managing money, other people's money. And so this fiduciary element is very well developed and understood in Switzerland. I've also done work in Liechtenstein, which is, again, an even smaller state. And the same thing goes there as well. The legal framework and the short ways for decision making there as well. So, as I say, there's a lot in there, but I think when we start to think about stakeholders, representation of stakes, fiduciary duties, as we develop these things, and being careful in what we implement, I think goes a long way.
Thank you, Louis.
Wow. Well, I think when we look at some of the, the challenges that it takes to control and trust the output of these and the use of some of these exponential technologies, it really comes down to how much you can trust the information that you're seeing. And whether that was, generated by an AI to make a recommendation, to make a decision, or whether it was generated by a team of analysts, right? At some level, you're choosing or required to trust what they're presenting to you. And at some level, if it's your team of analysts, you can go back through and look at the work they've done. With AI, that's a bit harder, right? It's been incentivized differently, and you have really no idea how these models have been incentivized as they've been trained, unless, of course, you go and spend the billions to train your own. But, as small states, as businesses that are growing, I think it's helpful to actually think of the state more as a business, as others have already mentioned on here. And when you look at another small state, El Salvador, They too had, implemented a lot of legal frameworks around specifically Bitcoin, but blockchain on the whole. Spent quite a bit of time there over the last couple of years. And while the legal frameworks, at first it's almost always chaos because, as Professor Garrett said, they weren't able to learn fast enough to stay ahead of what was going on in the world. It took some catching up. And after a year and a half of dealing with the chaos of companies wanting to come participate in the framework that they were building, entrepreneurs with crazy ideas and people with, digital assets with questionable backgrounds, they had to come up with a way to govern and organize those things that was transparent and fair and efficient. I think this really gets into the question of how efficient does it need to be, right? Because if we wanted to make everything 100% efficient, sure, we could plug in an AI and let it run all the decisions and just trust the outputs. But in many ways, of course, we know that that's not the right thing. And so we have to choose to turn away from some aspects of that, much like, the frameworks in El Salvador and Malta and other places have specifically prevented certain types of assets and activity, right? And perhaps in some areas, in some realms, the best move is, as Eelco said, to just say, no, we're not going to use that, or we're not going to do that because it's not in the best interest of all of the stakeholders. And therefore, it's not really in our own long-term best interest. And I think the question I would leave us with is, how do we imprint that upon others to understand that perhaps, what's best for them is not best for the whole, and because of that, they should make a more holistic choice. And I think that goes for directors, leaders, business owners. But how have you succeeded in that in the past, Edwin?
I'll pick up sort of in a sense where you left off. I was very perplexed at the enormous gap in the approach which in Europe we've got an understanding more or less amongst all the member states of the EU and probably the UK about what constitutes, good corporate governance, effective corporate governance, ethical governance. And we were overrun by new companies from Asia, from the States, and this cultural element, let's for the time being call it boardroom culture. And I'm sure Bob Garrett will want to talk about this from his experience in HK. But to my mind, the governance gap, the cultural gap, was so wide, it caused an implosion in the setting up of what was a pretty robust framework for allowing new type of technology companies to trade through Europe. And I think Lewis, in response to what you were saying, AI's introduction into the corporate sphere, it has definitely increased governance complexity, because individual directors and collectively as boards are forced, really forced, to engage with digital technologies, which, for me, we don't need a new generation of technology or, from the previous panel, environmentally expert based board members. We need board directors who clearly exercise their duties, which I think, ties in very nicely with the topic for today around the learning board, the learning director, the upskilling of directors. Because the prime responsibility of the board is to provide a meaningful oversight of the assets under their care. So you don't need to be, and you don't have to be an expert in generative technologies or blockchain or DLT or ESG or even sustainability. What the directors and collectively as boards do need is to be deeply conscious of the effect of innovation and new developments, whether it's from within or outside of the organization. And that consciousness through rapid learning, as Bob has, given us a term to play with today. This awareness, the need for what should the director be conscious of, it certainly, you have to be conscious of your directorial duty. And this is where the initiative to create content which is relevant to the challenges that we're facing today. And I don't lay these at the door of AI or blockchain in any way, shape or form. We just happen to be on a board discussing that. But the need for this awareness and to have fresh content to deal with very difficult subject matter for most directors, for most boards. It's a very urgent need. Of course, you can any independent director has the right to seek expert advice, expert input, if it's needed to clarify anything around their directorial duties. We mustn't forget that, and the costs of consulting an expert must be borne by the company which the person is the director is serving. So, certain basic kinds of information should be accessible to directors as they are dealing with technology issues or ESG issues or anything else. And I think we're in that position of trying to define who is best equipped to lead this accelerated learning process, to bring the directors in the Caribbean and elsewhere up to speed on these very complex issues.
Nigel, if I can pick up on two comments that were made.
Yeah, please go ahead.
By Edwin. and also by Louis. The first on the governance gap. I think it is, we see governance gaps all the time. Unfortunately, we just have to open the newspaper, and they're not unique to, in that sense, to one business or one region. And what I realize is that governance is not valued for the value for what it brings. And I think that's most obvious, or one of the cases which is most obvious was FTX, which was, as we know, a Bahamas-based crypto exchange with over 1,000, and I think actually 3,000, but I'm not certain, legal entities without a board, not regulated to the extent needed, and in my mind, ungovernable. The way it was set up, and you can ask yourself if it was on purpose. And so I asked myself, coming from the investment business, who is going to invest in that? And how does your due diligence work? Literally today, here in Zurich, over coffee with a vice chairman of a very reputed bank, over coffee, we were talking about investing in AI, and I asked him, how do you do due diligence? And he said, well, he basically admitted there was not much due diligence going on. Now, that is not, he's not in bad company. We've seen A-class investors in FTX that put other people's money, including Canadian pension funds, Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, and so on, into FTX. And one can ask, okay, due diligence is one thing, but there's only one force which is going to help investors feeling represented on the one hand, and on the other hand, also force companies to beef up on their skills and report on risks of these technologies and so on. And that is the ongoing governance structure. And so it is, from that perspective, not even a regulatory question to where we need to, how we need to improve governance, out of market integrity interest and what have you. It is also and primarily in companies' own interest to be able to project trust to investors, to look to say, have a look, we have a great team, we got governance in place, we got structures in place, and so on. And that's what I also advise when I deal with startups in this space, and I've been doing that in this particular space now since 8 years, blockchain particularly. In the absence of regulation or in a pre-regulatory environment, why not already design governance such that you can present it, defend it towards investors, and maybe you also get a higher valuation as a result. So it is in companies' own interest, if they want to be the competition, to, as I say, project trust by having proper governance in place. In fact, recently I got the question from somebody who also wanted to start a crypto exchange, the next one. And I said, don't tell me that you're going to execute faster and that you can have more pairs to trade. And I mean, that's all already being done. And he said, so what should I do? And I said, well, show that you're trustworthy. Right. And by the way, if you want to have the next question, you need to pay me for it. How that works, right? Yeah. So that the charity only goes so far. Now, on the holistic choice, only one remark. I recently had the privilege of having a long conversation with Colin Meyer, who some of you know. He is a retired professor, emeritus professor from Oxford, and a management professor. And I can recommend his latest book, where basically he says a couple of things in that book, but one thing he says is we need to price in, let's say, externalities. So you solve a problem, right? You do something to help the world, be it environmentally or socially, an impact, for which it should be paid, but you should not create problems for other stakeholders. So I come back to the stakeholder analysis. And if you do, that needs to be priced in because you need to fix it. And so if you are trying to make a holistic choice, then this is it's a very eloquent book, very easily readable as well. I can recommend it. Then this is a way of thinking, let's say, that again provides economic incentive, not just legal incentive, to be able to make a holistic choice. One last thing that I want to say about regulation. I've seen so many panels and discussions over the last years about regulation especially in blockchain and crypto, that and tokenization and so on, and regulators who typically are lawyers look at each other and say, how do I go about it, and then don't necessarily come with a huge great answer. It's all on the development. Yes, we can learn from current corporate governance regulation. Yes, especially in the investment field again, we can borrow or take, but things are also different. And so I think that we need to much more look at behavioral behaviors than just sort of older legalistic approaches to regulation. So we need to look at culture, behavior, things which we already find in some regulatory bodies that overlook financial institutions, in terms of, as I say, culture and incentives and so on, that causes behavior. This is especially the case, I think, if we look at trying to control proper governance and oversight of people's assets in a decentralized infrastructure like DeFi, Web3, and so on, where you have no clue what's going on around the world with tokens and so on, because it is all decentralized. That needs to flow in by design, and a legal approach to this does not do full justice to what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. Again, two things. One, Lewis mentioned what is the basis for trust, and Edwin referred to we need to be deeply conscious of the effects of innovation. And for me, that word trust is a huge word. And I go back to Stephen Covey or his son, trust, character, and competence. What's your track record? What's your experience like? What are your qualifications? And what's the basis for trust? Are we in a win-win sort of situation? And it's critical that directors, especially directors of our vintage, have the courage to stand up and say, I don't understand what you're telling me, explain it. Because if you cannot explain it to me, then what's the basis for trusting? So again, I think we're in that situation where guys want to jump on the latest bandwagon without understanding what they're getting involved in, and really don't have the courage to raise their hand and tell, look, this doesn't make sense to me. This is a tool. What will this tool help me to accomplish? And how can I understand the inner workings of it? Show me what you have done before. Show me where this has worked. Those kinds of tough questions. That's where we need that independence and very skeptical approach to any of these things. I mean, some of them are very good, but one needs to kick the tires. Let me ask Professor Gaia to jump in here and give us some of his perspective.
Oh, right. Sorry, I wasn't quite expecting that. Okay. No, I need time to digest at the moment. I mean, it has been a very, very interesting day. My immediate reaction is that we started with Charlotte Valeur on the alliance of small states.
Mm-hmm.
But I think by the end of the day, we're actually looking at the idea of an alliance of small, smart states. Because the quality of what's gone on this afternoon and the quality of the potential inputs that have been mentioned is such that I think we could begin to talk with our political power brokers about the notion of creating smart states. And I think that would be attractive all round, because that, it's not, we're not going to compete with the superpowers, but I really do believe they're all in trouble at the moment. So we have to find our own survival, and we've got the intellectual and practical basis to be able to do that. But if we did take that route, and I was just thinking this through, I think for the organizations like CCGI and its sister organizations, it would almost be a step change, an inflection point for their role. So they're not just bringing on the current generations, but they are bringing on the future generations, but in such a way to encompass some really deep problem resolution. And what struck me, it was, well, when I was in architectural education, we were the rebel school who was outside the state system, the Architectural Association School in London, but it was 147 years old, and it had been founded by students for students, and even nowadays is run by students, which is a very interesting institution. And what it did was to take societal problems which were not resolvable in the state system, or seemingly unresolvable in the state system, and put groups of students onto it, and then call down the faculty as the students needed them to resolve the particular problems. And that's worked pretty well over the years. And it struck me that when people were saying, most directors who have been mentioned today want to do the right things, but don't know how to do it. It struck me that an approach that took such intractable problems in a community and then applied willing volunteers of some sort to say, we'll try and face up to that. And then they applied in turn a critical faculty that didn't try and teach, but tried to learn from those intractable problems. And then the output of that was then quickly circulated around the alliance. That sort of thing might be a very cost-effective way of beginning to change the nature of how we prepare our new directors for the future. Don't know, it's a more top of head thing at the moment, but I could see something like CCGI becoming not a bureaucracy trying to run such a thing, but an agency that just put people in contact with each other, but most importantly, circulated the information coming out of the system. And I'm not quite sure how that fits into blockchain, but I know it does somehow or other. And the trust side of that is definitely going to be built there. Yeah, I think that's where I am at the moment.
Thank you very much. Eelco, before we move on, can you give us the name of that Colin Mayer's book?
You know what? Let me put the camera off and I'll grab it right now. It's
All right, okay.
one
Thank
of my
you.
bookshelves here. Hang on.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Camera, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may ask, we do have our guest from Namibia present. That's Esha Luanda. Esha, we want to ask you if you could put on your camera, please, and also put on your audio so we can do a quick check and make sure that you'd be heard in the room. And right,
Hey.
good. In the camera on. So at the conclusion of this panel, we'll be asking Escher to just share a little bit on his experience in Namibia and setting up his Institute of Directors, and a few minutes on the African experience before we come back to Professor Garrett for closing thoughts on moving forward from here. All right.
All
So
right, and the name of that book, correct me if I'm wrong, Eelco, it's Capitalism and Crises.
Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you. Louis, you wanted to add anything before we move over to Escher?
No, I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you, Professor Garrett, for joining in. And I think just to leave everyone with one thing, there's a protocol, the standard that's been developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, which is one of the largest open source groups in the world. It's called the Decentralized Identifiers Standard, and it's a bit like the WWW of identity and data ownership in the future. And I think as we are faced with some of the choices that we'll inevitably be faced with in the coming years, it's great to look at what standards are underlying the things that we're adopting and accepting. And that's community-based, and I think we can all agree, as we're all here as a community, that the things produced of free will and community are often the better choice.
Yeah.
great. Okay, any closing?
Can I perhaps just add to that in terms of a concluding remark, which is it's been a tremendous set of conversations throughout the day. But I'd just like to come back to this very basic but super important point. We were talking about, what do the next generation of directors need to know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not just the next generation who needs to know it. I mean, it's also our own generation, which is we have to stick to our knitting, and that means exercising directorial duties. I mean, if you're a board member, your main role is not to be an expert. You're there to ask the right questions. You're meant to be there to ensure accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And as Bob has often pointed out in his many wonderful books, you're there to provide this all-important strategic guidance. I think we heard from Peter that strategic guidance could be simply putting your foot down and saying no. But of course, to get consensus on a board, to get people to turn down the opportunity to enhance their organization using new technologies, it takes some skill to lobby in the background with your fellow board members in order to get them to say no to opportunities. But the fundamental about asking expanded questions and driving a more in-depth and productive discussion about AI or blockchain or sustainability or any other topic in your particular organization, it takes time, experience, training, and my feeling is that the board members, we are responsible. We have to champion an AI-aware culture. in our companies. You know, there's a need for what Bob has always spoken about from the early days in his wise writings, which is that we have to embrace continuous learning and ask the right questions, and insist on regular updates about technology topics which could be dramatically affecting the futures of our own businesses, but more importantly, stakeholders. So, I'd kind of like to leave the discussion on the note that there's a desperate need for the content that we were talking about earlier on at the beginning of the day's discussions. And, a big part of that is learning how to be a critical thinker and how to ask critical questions about any technology or issue that's impacting on your business, the business that you are responsible for.
Thank you very much.
Maybe
I think, go
last,
ahead.
yeah, just a
Eelco.
last comment. I mean, lots to say about and to reflect actually on also what Edwin said. But I want to pick up on the small smart states comment that Professor Garrett made. So what I've learned, so first of all, we've laid out many issues that we need to look into, number one. Number two, we have macro trends that we're all part of, if we want it or not, be it AI, blockchain, or something else. And so we have to adapt ourselves. And what I've learned from not only the Swiss example, but also others, is that you can, based on your capabilities as a small country, you can choose, right? Your capabilities, your strength, and say, okay, this is something which is going on, and I'm going to occupy this niche or this particular area, and I'm going to develop there. So in Switzerland, it was the legal system around tokens. If that is a strong capability of the country, which we have here in wealth management, there's a huge service provider community here around value. Then it was and is actually very successful. And so I think it's true that we can, as in blockchain, we talk about ecosystems. I think there's also the possibility, the opportunity for an ecosystem of smart states, where different states come up and say, this is what we can do well, this is what we can develop, and that is the niche we're going to occupy. Last one sentence to this, was very upbeat. I was in Rwanda last year, small country, and there's lots to say about Rwanda, but one thing that they do really well is e-government, digital government, and they do it so well that they actually export this to other African countries. They know that Rwanda, as a small country, can't take everything on, so this is one of their niches that they're developing, and it is doing excellent in that and also in some other niches. And they've adapted a few things to that end, introduced common law, introduced English as the main language instead of French, and a few other things. So I think that's the way forward for small states, not competing, but choosing your niche, connecting with others with other niches, and creating that chain, that value chain, if you will, to satisfy those macro trends.
Thank you very much. Kamla, I think I don't see any. Do we have any? We have some comments, questions? No.
Yeah, no questions to address in the chat.
All right. So let's get Esha.
Yeah, so Esha and I connected on LinkedIn, and he was very happy when he saw this conference being advertised. And so we have invited him to share, because he was really instrumental in setting up the institute in Namibia, the Institute of Directors there. So Esha, we are very happy you were able to join us at the start of today. So you would have heard a lot of what Charlotte Valère would have shared and our expectations and some of the things we may be able to achieve. So we'd be happy to hear your thoughts now as you speak to what were some of the challenges that you would have overcome and some of the ambitions that you now have for some of the African states and how we may possibly be able to collaborate and learn from each other.
Thank you very much, Kamla. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to everybody on the call and all the eminent speakers. Very happy to learn a lot from their experiences. Obviously, to start off with, this is a very topical issue and something very close to my heart in the sense that as smaller states, obviously, we potentially under-resourced, and we need to get to these synergies in order to better our respective governance standards in our respective countries, especially with emerging trends all over the world, issues of AI, ESG, and even the more mundane stuff like, can we not collaborate on training solutions using applications like AI and so forth? Just to start off with, for those that are not very familiar with Namibia, Namibia is a country just to the north of South Africa, south of Angola, to the west is the Atlantic Ocean, and to the right is Botswana, from where my colleague and sister Mpo hails from. And then to the northeast is Zimbabwe and Zambia. GDP of around just over 30 billion US, population of just marginally over 3.1 million. And the country was colonized by both South Africa and Germany, and hence strong links to what happens in South Africa. We didn't have an IOD or ICG up until only 2016, which I'm privileged to have been very involved in. And we only got our Code of Corporate Governance in 2014, which is somewhat a transplantation of the South African King 3 Code, which we customized to fit our circumstances. But as we all know, it's always a battle between customization and making sure that you follow best practice. So we're happy to be using what they call the NAM Code. Just as to how we started to set up the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance, it was the 9 of us, a group of like-minded professionals coming from different backgrounds, finance, economics, legal, sustainability, and the like, that felt it's high time that we explore the possibility of setting up a Directors Institute or a Corporate Governance Institute. We started off with a simple 10-page concept note, which after constituting a steering committee, which ultimately got elevated to a board of directors in a non-profit organization, we were able to get the ball rolling. And on the basis of first things first, what we started off doing was to make sure that we were duly registered in terms of the country's corporate laws, and then started engaging various stakeholders one by one. Obviously, the key stakeholders that we had to engage was our Chamber of Commerce, because we needed to get the business community on board, our Ministry of Public Enterprises, considering that We have just under 100 SOEs, and they all needed to align to good governance practice. We engaged our Namibian Stock Exchange for in order to make sure that we aligned with the listed companies, academia, just to make sure that there is congruency between what they teach at institutions of higher learning and sound governance practice. Obviously, the blue chip corporates engage the Big Four. The International Finance Corporation were equally helpful. I recall them supporting us in terms of technical and financial support for our very first workshop. And then, of course, the Africa Corporate Governance Network, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. It's not very active anymore, but they had this program that they were running with the IFC, whereby they were trying to allow small IODs get established or get empowered. And this is where we could benefit in. And the model is somewhat similar to what we're talking about here, because what they would do is try and tap from the more established IODs and allow these benefits to flow down to the emerging IODs. So the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance is one of the beneficiaries of these initiatives. They've done something in Liberia, Senegal, Ethiopia, and a few others. So with that, we kept growing slowly, and then we also upheld the belief that for a governance entity, you need to practice good governance. We made sure that we had a strategy in place. We worked on our constitution. We set up our website in order to ensure visibility, made sure we placed ourselves on the social media platforms from Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so forth. And we needed to make sure that we exercised utmost financial prudence. At the time I stepped down in 2022, I parted on the back of making sure that we had audited financial statements, just so that there is legitimacy and credibility around the work that we were doing. I think one aspect that one should talk to is how did we try and make sure that we were sustainable, having been established in such a pretty short period of time. This is where we capitalized on issues of membership. We had a unique membership model whereby we signed up the local blue chip companies at a fee of $3,000 for what we call a major corporate, whereas for an ordinary corporate, we would charge them $1,100. And this we did in return of customized training and consulting sessions at a drastically reduced cost. So this turned out to be a win-win situation because our membership could grow. Latest I checked, we are at 30 major corporates and 13 small corporates. For a small economy, we felt that was substantial. So as we grew, we started engaging into workshops. Initially, they were mostly in-house, customized, but we started doing open workshops, symposia, master classes targeted at specific topics. We do a flagship conference, which last year attracted a total of 300 delegates, highly sponsored by most of the corporates that needed to gain exposure. So that is one thing that any emerging IOD or CGI should consider, because then one tends to have sustainable funding streams. In terms of staffing, it's very important that an IOD or CGI is well resourced. We're sitting with a staff complement of 3 persons. One is the executive director, who occupies the level of CEO. We have a marketing lead and administrator and an outsourced finance function. So it's been quite a journey, and maybe just to reflect on how this ties in with the issue of collaboration with among small states. One of the things that we did at NRCG at the time, we were, and I believe we still are, last time I checked, of the Global Network of Director Institutes. Obviously, it's not the most cost-effective, especially for the smaller IODs, but obviously their model is such that any IOD can member, because one has access to resources of sister institutions. And this is a model that can work within our environments, especially the smaller states. One would be able to, should be able to know that, for instance, within the African continent, where we have a number of other IODs. Last time I checked, it was only the Mauritius Institute of Directors and the South African IOD, and plus the Namibian Institute of Corporate Governance. I mean, that's 3 out of over 20 IODs. So obviously it all comes at a cost, and we can come up with a more manageable version where fees are very insignificant, to allow any state governance entity to be able to benefit from what the other states or institutions are able to provide at a limited cost, considering the constraints that we might be facing. I think I've spoken enough, and that is the perspective that I felt I should bring through. And that is it from my side for now, Kamla.
Thank you so much. Yes, did I unmute? Right, great. Yes, thank you so much, Asha. And of course, it was very interesting to hear that whole journey that you had in Namibia, and how you got support. And I like that idea of the sustainable model where you approached the blue chip corporations, and I'm very pleased. 30 large organizations. I think that's awesome. You know, and just as Charlotte mentioned at the start of today, as we think through any idea of what we do, there must be a commercial side of it too, because all of this work cannot just be voluntary. We must find ways to pay our facilitators, to pay the persons who are taking the time to build and grow a lot of the very necessary tools and resources that is needed. So you mentioned the Global Network of Director Institutes, and I will confess CCGI is not a member. There's no reason for us to pay the high fees to become a member of that the Global Directors Institute. So instead, as you say, I am sure that there is another model which can be developed that ensures that small institutes like ours can pay a fee that is insignificant, but we collaborate and share a lot of our resources and stuff. So thank you very much.
I could not agree more. I think this should be the beginning of good and better things. We primed for greatness if we can harness our collective attributes. And we just need to appreciate that, especially within emerging economies, we're not as highly capitalized as entities in the major economies. But we should remember that most of the same corporates that operate everywhere are in our smaller jurisdictions. And my experience has been that those same institutions would want to make a meaningful contribution towards initiatives like governance, ESG on a broader level, and whatever initiatives. I mean, governance education is always something that benefits the organizations in the long run. I mean, they say good governance practitioners, good economies, good countries, and these can only lead to prosperity.
Yes. So thank you so very much.
You're most welcome. I know
great.
it's been quite a long day, and thank you very much for the platform. I will be connecting you to the new chairperson and CEO of our Governance Institute to take the discussions further. I stepped down 2 years ago, but I'm very much involved with what they do. They've conferred me fellowship. So, but happy to collaborate on anything where I might be of help.
Yes, thank you so very much. So as we head towards the end of today's conference now, we've brought Professor Garrett back onto the virtual stage because at this point, as he had started sharing with Nigel and the previous panel, there are a lot of ideas that would be flowing through our minds, you know, coming out of the discussions today. And I felt really happy with the description that was given by Edwin earlier. What did he say it was? The firepower, the brain power that was brought together today. I'm missing where I took that note. Forgive me, Edwin, but that was such a lovely observation to help us all feel that, you know, we do have enough intellectual power that we can arrive at how do we get past. Yes, that's it, Cosina. Thank you. The intellectual firepower that has been brought into the room today for this conference. And so, Professor Garrett, you know, you started off with giving us what I honestly felt was the most important purpose that generating out of this, and that is, you know, finding means to ensure that our learning, our rate of learning is greater than the rate of change. And so we have to move into how do we do that? And there were a number of really good ideas that were presented by persons and some cautions that were offered as well, even as we try to move forward. And one of the ideas that you offered even at the start as well, Professor Garrett, was the notion of possibly coming up with one project per continent. You know, that sounds really good. So we're looking at things that would directly impact our outcomes. So we are seeing movement and growth in our governance practices, even as we try to put in place the type of training and resources which Charlotte mentioned earlier, ensuring that it's state of the art, ensuring that it is accredited, and that it's an acceptable global level that directors in small states can all be able to access. So as we have come towards the end of this initial discussion, any closing thoughts from you? Additional, I mean, we really test your brain power, Professor Garrett. We are always asking you to push.
I realize now that any words I say stand between me and your food and rest. So I'll be very careful. Yeah, the problems I mentioned, I mean, just one per continent is one way of doing it. I would, but it's, what is the intractable problem of corporate governance that comes across either the chairman's desk or the minister's desk or the prime minister's desk, say at least once every year, and nobody really knows how to do it. That's the type of problem I'm looking for. How we do that, I don't know at the moment. So what I would suggest is that we try and fix a time, say within 3 months, where we reconvene. But during the period, we look at how can we identify those problems, and can we suggest 2 or 3 ways in which we as an alliance might begin to try and resolve them. That's all I'm going to say. Except peace be with you, Pax Vobiscum, and thank you, everybody. It's been a terrific day.